In terms of acoustic players or acoustic rock recordings, that kind of thing, my favorite acoustic player is the same as my favorite electric player, is the same as my favorite songwriter. My favorite producer is Jimmy Page. He was the guy for me that did all of it. So I'm not I'm again no kind of acoustic aficionado. I don't know. I'm not well versed in who's the best of this technique or whatever. That to me it was just kind of all about the songwriting. And that's one of the things that I love so much about Led Zeppelin and about Jimmy Page, was that there were such a wide spectrum within the same band that was covered. You had Tangerine and Over the Hills and Far Away and that kind of stuff, all the way to the heaviest, Heartbreaker and Whole Lot of Love and all that kind of stuff. So it really kind of ran the spectrum. So I don't know that I see much difference when I pick up a guitar. If I pick up one guitar, I'll play it differently than I might play another one that I pick up. So if I pick up an acoustic, I naturally play it differently than I will if I pick up an electric. But it's not a very calculated decision or strategy when I pick one up. I just kind of pick it up and see what it feels like and see what I can do with it. And then when I find that I'm able to do something with it that I think sounds cool, I see if I can do that again. And then if I can do it again, I just keep doing it. I never honestly know how to correctly answer this line of questioning, because I wish I could say 10 years ago I decided to implement fingerpicking as a tool in my arsenal as a player. So I studied the work of this guy and that guy, or that woman, or this person, or whatever. I didn't, man. I don't remember when I first started fingerpicking a guitar. I don't remember the first time I picked up a slide. I just kind of did it, and I don't even know if I'm doing it right half the time. I just love having a guitar in my hands and seeing if I can make it sound cool. It sounds like such a stupid go-to answer, but it's really how I play. It's how I write. It's everything. So I think, again, going back to some of the Led Zeppelin stuff, and it's just kind of classic rock in general. There was a lot of acoustic guitar work into a lot of that stuff, and just having the instrument around and picking it up and becoming comfortable with it. And I think I probably started finger picking because I didn't have a pick around. Yeah, so I guess in terms of coming up with a guitar part, like All I Had to Lose, there is a basic chord progression. So in the course of coming up with the part, I will quickly identify what that chord progression is, and then there are hammer-ons, or pull-off, or suspensions and things like that you can do with each chord to sort of, there'll be multiple ones you can try, and you kind of, each will change a little bit of the flavor or the feel or the color or the shape of the chord. So as you go through that chord progression, you can try those alternates and start feeling whether one sits better than another. Sometimes it's just the straight chord that's the best choice. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's adding a 7 or something like that. You know what I mean? Just kind of moving the parts of the chord around to see how you can make it have a little bit different feel. But again, that stuff for me is just kind of more trial and error. It's not theoretical for me at all. I really don't know much theory at all. It's just knowing a few chord shapes, and it helps to know a little bit how the scales and chords relate to each other. But outside of that, it's just kind of poking around until you make it sound like you want it to. I think no matter how technical you make something or how sophisticated you make something, there has to be, at its essence, a song in there. And a song is a chord progression with the melody, usually, over top of it. And those things tend to be pretty simple. So whether you start with that or work it in later. I mean, there have been times even with the metal stuff, with the Lamb stuff, like I'll have a riff that's based on some kind of technical run or some kind of groove, and I will sort of retrofit a chord progression to it so that it feels a little more musical, or kind of takes on a little more of a song versus riff. You know, there's a riff and then there's a song. You know what I mean? So you can take a song and riff it out, or you can take a riff and song it out. You know what I mean? So it's really at its essence, a good song has a progression, and I think no matter how tricky you make it, or flashy you make it, or sophisticated you make it, it has to. It doesn't have to, but if it's going to be worth a crap at its essence, there's going to be a song there. So that's why I think some of the best songwriters are, you know, Tom Petty, and, you know, people talk about Bob Dylan and the simplicity of that kind of stuff, because the essence of the song is there. You can build all the stuff you want on top of it. I mean, you can take a George Harrison song and do a complete orchestra around it, but at its essence, it's still that simple song. So I think if that's there, the possibilities are endless. For my part, I sat in a vocal booth with a Guild D55 and strummed out the bit, you know. My producer Josh Wilbur certainly ran it through a mic pre. I couldn't tell you which it was. I think it might have been an API. We tried a couple different mics. I remember us trying two mics, one being a very nice mic and another one being an extremely revered, expensive mic. And we tried them both, and we put the very nice mic on first, and we loved the way it sounded. And then we brought in the royal, gilded, bejeweled, expensive mic and put that on it, and it sounded okay, but we kind of liked the other one better, you know, so we went with that. And I don't remember what it was, honestly, but that's kind of how we work. We usually just try stuff until something sounds cool. It's not so, people often think everything's so scientific, and so it's not for us. It's a lot of times it's, does this sound cool? Nope. You know, try another one. Does that? Nope. That's cool. You like that? Fiddle, fiddle, fiddle. Set the bit and go. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how we go. It's a lot of it's intuition. A lot of it's just kind of trusting your instinct. So we set it up, and I was just really isolated in a booth. I had to for a lot of that stuff on Ether. There was an issue with it was so isolated in there, and it was quite compressed. So I can still hear identify parts in some of the tracks where you can hear me breathing. I was holding my breath through some of those tracks, because you could actually, we had a debate in the studio about whether I should breathe through my nose or through my mouth, because apparently I have this very slight whistle when I breathe through my nose. So at one point Josh was like, comes on the talk back, he's like, yo, breathe through your mouth, man. I was like, okay. So for the rest of the session, I'm like, and that's a real thing, you know what I mean? Because those aren't the kind of problems you have when you record Lamb of God albums. I don't know what makes me think of this, but on some of those early albums, if you heard the isolated track of Randy, he still had his like wallet chains and all his jewelry and stuff on, and he's thrashing around the vocal booth, and you could hear in the tracks all his stuff jingling and crashing and ringing out and that kind of thing. So we strip him down these days. But yeah, so what were we talking about? The tone of the guitar. So yeah, a lot of it is just kind of, you know, getting the tone dialed in, and then adjusting your strum, adjusting sort of, the impact of your right hand on there, and just getting a feel for being able to play it consistently, but have it sort of hit the recording correctly and consistently. And then, you know, a good mic pre, and I don't think it was all that affected outside of that. It's just a really nice guitar with some fresh strings on it, and a good mic, and some controlled breathing. So that pentatonic scale with the flat fifth, I feel like is really kind of the foundation for heavy metal, really. That's what Black Sabbath for me is built on. That's just the signature thing, and that sort of, for whatever reason, when you drop that fifth a half step, it just sounds evil and in the coolest way possible. Add in some down tuning and some distortion, and you're halfway to hell, right? So that song in particular, Straight for the Sun, for me was kind of a reference to a lot of that New Orleans doom stuff. I Hate God and Crowbar, and that sort of real low down tuned, slow, sludgy, that which I think really came for those guys a lot from the Melvins, which in turn came from Sabbath. You know, so it's just one of those offshoots of that kind of doom, slowed down doom metal. And of course that gets carried out to extremes. You got dudes tuning down to A and holding a chord for a whole, 4 measures before they change, that kind of stuff. That stuff's cool, it's really scary sounding and really heavy. Straight for the Sun was just kind of our nod to that. I think there's something for me about blues rock that is, there seems to be very little disconnect between the player and the emotion of the player and the sound that's coming out of the amp. It's like, I don't want to sound too cheesy here, but when I hear like blues rock, it's to me it's like the emotion of the player onto the guitar through the amp and straight to the listener. Like it's a pure form of expression on the instrument. And what I love about those players, about guys like Mark Ford, Billy Gibbons, Jimi Hendrix, Luther Dickinson, Warren Haynes, is that even within sort of a similar maybe style of music, they all have their own kind of voice and their own character. And a lot of those guys, for me, are very identifiable. And that's always been a goal of mine, is to, in some form or another, be characteristic in my playing. I'm never going to be the fastest. I'm never going to be the most technical. I'm never going to be the most innovative. I just don't think I'm built for that kind of stuff. But what I do hope to do, and what I aspire to with my playing, is to have a voice that's genuine and honest and hopefully unique and identifiable. And I think, to me, that is more my ambition than it is to be anything else on the instrument. When I have a riff, very often when I'm presenting songs, song ideas within the context of Lamb of God, I'll bring in a demo that I've done at home, on my computer. And one of the things I do really explore pretty in depth when I'm working these songs out is snare placement. I'm always open to any of my demos changing or having the drums move around and that kind of thing. But and the kick drum patterns and all that stuff don't matter as much to me. It's where the snare falls. So a lot of times I'll have an idea about what kind of feel I want to have, but you can really take the same riff and the snares on the 1s and 3s versus the snares on the 2s and 4s versus halftime, cut time. All those things make a dramatic, monumental difference in the feel, vibe, groove of the riff. And it's about finding the right one or the right combinations, because very often in Lamb of God we will apply different, and it's not uncommon, it's certainly not just us, but it's about finding the right patterns and the right interplay of snare patterns to really kind of suit the riff. And you can really change the dynamic a whole lot of the same riff just by altering the snare pattern. So that's one thing when I'm assembling riffs or songs. It's one of the first things I decide with regards to a riff, is like where the snare sits and kind of what the groove, what the pocket of it is. Dead Seas was really, as I recall, kind of a Dime reference, and I can't think of the exact song or songs that he does it, but Dime would do just these crazy sort of, like elephant howl bends or whatever in the middle of a riff, and I think Dead Seas was just kind of me playing around with that sort of idea, that technique, and somebody catching at me, what was that? That's cool, and then we just kind of turn it into a riff. Accidental. I think there's a real you could really make something kind of groove in a different way by properly placed triplets in the riff. But a lot of that, especially the early stuff where there's weird triplet patterns or different kind of it's on the one the first 4 times around, and then it's kind of on the and the second, this kind of weird triplet insertions that we'll do is really honestly a representation of Willie and I trying to confuse each other. So Willie and I have had over the years a very, very healthy competition, and Willie in particular will bring in a riff that's as hard as he can make it to play in the hopes that he will finally baffle me, and I'll just throw my guitar against the wall and walk out of the room, which of course I want to do but never do. And so a lot of that early stuff with crazy triplet stuff that seems string skipping and triplets that seems really difficult to play because it is me or Willie trying to frustrate the other one. That's just that simple. It's just us being competitive. There came a point in time where the band started being pretty high profile, and I found myself in situations playing shows alongside or being compared in publications or something like that to players that technically were out of my league, and I sort of felt this obligation to catch up in some ways, and I'm just being brutally honest. So I would sit in woodshed. I would just kind of work on sweeps and alternate picking and that kind of thing because I felt like I was behind the curve in comparison to some of my peers. So it was really just kind of out of self-doubt that I would sit and learn licks, and then I would work these things up and make solos out of them. And I mean, for whatever the catalyst or whatever the impetus for it, it's good exercise. It makes me a better player. Keeps you from being lazy on the instrument. But really, I guess that's just that competitive side of me, like not being comfortable with some of these other players running circles around me, or people saying that I'm all right, but I can't do this or that or the other thing. There was a lick in the song Grace, the Lamb of God's song Grace, and I remember reading on some guitar forum back when I used to read that kind of stuff where someone was mentioning the fact that I sucked because I couldn't sweep pick. So I got on YouTube, and Herman Lee had a tutorial on sweep picking. So I found the first Herman Lee tutorial, and the first sweep pick he did, I learned it and I put it in the solo for Grace. So thanks, Herman. It's all the same.